The purpose of the education system is to develop good human beings capable of rational thought and action, possessing compassion and empathy, courage and resilience, scientific temper and creative imagination, with sound ethical mornings and values. It aims at producing engaged, productive, and contributing citizens for building an equitable, inclusive, and a plural society. And this has been envisaged by the new education policy 2020. Rote learning, which was the basis of Indian education system, is finally being shown the door. And it is being replaced by the competency-based learning and development of students, which tests high-order skills such as analysis, critical thinking, and conceptual clarity. The long-awaited National Education Policy 2020 was announced by the Union Cabinet on July 29th, 2020. And this policy is basically having an objective of revising and revamping the Indian education structure and move towards creation of new system that is aligned with aspirational goals of 21st century education system. The principles of the policy include development of cognitive skills, that is fundamental skills of literacy and numeracy, and higher order cognitive skills such as critical thinking and problem solving. Now, instead of the education system must focus on development of soft skills, that is social and emotional skills, including cultural awareness and empathy, perseverance, grit, teamwork, leadership, and communication. And that's exactly where this new education policy also harps on. So to discuss the imminent changes that this education policy will bring in and how it will impact learners, not only in the school curriculum, higher education system, and throughout, we have with us Mr. Sameer Arora. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to him. Mr. Sameer is a natural leader, a collaborator, and an educator with 24 years of school experience, not limited to teaching only across all levels of school, but also in integrating pedagogical innovations in curriculum, fostering partnerships, school administration, resource management, communication, and much more. He has the experience of establishing 2 travel-based startups offering experiential education programs to youth and has traveled to over 20 countries. He firmly believes travel is the best form of education. He has also worked with National Geographic Channel for one of their education programs, Unlock R as country head. He has volunteered with many organizations and has been awarded for distinguished services to Asian Regional Space Settlement Design Competition and Duke of Edinburgh Award. Of all the projects that he's been involved in, conceptualizing and servicing as a festival director for Sanj, Amritsar Lahore Peace Festival is one of his favorite associations, where he was focusing on initiating sustainable peace dialogue with youth in both the countries and reached out to more than 30,000 children, youth, and artists across borders. He has also been awarded for Clay's Nobel Educator of Distinction for Excellence in Teaching and Encouragement of and dedication to the academic success of students by National Society of High School Scholars, USA. He's recently awarded as the Inspirational Educator Award by International Alliance of Counselors and Educators, and also has been nominated as Counselor of the Year under the leadership of Legacy School, Bangalore, which has been bestowed as the School of the Year for Transformative Counseling Award under his leadership. He's a prolific speaker and a passionate educator, and we are so humbled and delighted to have him on our platform. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you for joining us today. And I would like to call our chairperson, Ms. Kanika Ved, to have the welcome address for him.
Good evening. On behalf of Flow Kanpur, I would like to extend a very warm welcome and thank you all for joining us today. My heartfelt thanks to Mr. Sameer Arora for being there here with us. Nelson Mandela once rightly said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And countries today compete on literacy rates, which ultimately leads to higher economic growth and development. The year 2020 marked a major positive breakthrough in the form of National Education Policy 2020, based on the pillars of accessibility, equity, quality, affordability, accountability. New education policy aims at transforming India into a vibrant knowledge hub. As we complete a year of progressive roadmap, let's look at the institutional sensitivity and mounting steps which are accelerating our progress towards the realization of this omnibus policy. To understand the changing landscapes, today I would like to call upon Mr. Arora. Would request Kriti to take the session forward. Welcome, Mr. Arora.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. A very warm welcome. And before I proceed with my discussion, I would just like to put a note. I am down under the weather with a very bad throat. So you'll all have to bear with my voice, which may be cracking at some point of time. We've discussed and a couple of questions which we're going to discuss today. For the audience who are joining us as parents, educators and students, if you have any questions that you would want to take on, please put that on the chat box and we will try to take up as many questions as the time permits. So my first question to you in understanding the new education policy and unraveling it on the same is, the National Education Policy marks out a couple of key changes. What, according to you, are the key highlights for the parents to keep a watch on?
Thank you, Kirti, and thank you, Kanika, for this invitation. I just would like to begin with the disclaimer that I'm not an expert on new education policy. Every time I read it, I find something interesting and something different from what I've read. And I'm also I'm by design and by attitude, extremely optimist. So should you find some sort of tone of pessimism, please feel free to check me and ask questions. So I think it's a very interesting policy if you look at it. And I think for the first time, the government has recognized, or the committee has recognized, that parents have a big agency in the child's learning journey. And the parent agency, we only talk about in private schools, a lot about private schools. And it honestly, it happens at a very transactional level. You know, parents don't have much say, not much to contribute, except probably paying fees to the school or sort of coming on the PT meet and taking feedback, right? But I think the curricular and pedagogical framework which the NEP is proposed for early childhood, 0 to 8 years, which is, I think, what NCERT will develop, it'll rely heavily on local traditions developed over hundreds of years. So I think that will serve as a common shared resource for both parents as well as formal early childhood education institutions. And making it easier for parents to participate more meaningfully in the child's formative years through storytelling, poetry, songs. So all the traditions which have been sort of getting lost over a period of time, they might be revived through the curriculum which NCERT is going to work on, and the parent will have a big agency in that. Because I think one of the next point which I wanted to make is the bilingual approach to teaching. I think being the youngest nation in the world, we have the highest population in any of the countries around the world to have people below 34 years. I think 54% of population is young, right? So, and also English is one of our advantage, I think, over China, one of the edges. But the scientific studies and a lot of research have also shown that if the children study and learn in their native language, they learn faster and the concepts are reinforced for a longer period of time. There is better understanding. And coming from an experience where a lot of my friends are raising their kids with no spoken English at all. They are speaking, and they're educated people in extremely well-placed jobs in multinational corporations, but yet they're teaching their children to start at least first 5 to 6 years exposure to only vernacular languages. So I think that's what NEP has been able to identify. I know there is a lot of criticism around it, but I think it's not mandatory. So bilingual approach in teaching, even the concepts of maths and science, makes it easier again parents to teach, right? Because otherwise a lot of parents who are first generation learners, or they've not been able to go to private sector schools or English medium schools, for a lack of a better word, if I may say so, they used to feel disassociated with their children. And I've seen that in my own journey. So, I think so that's the bilingual approach to teaching, wherein the concepts of maths and science will also be taught in vernacular languages, is something interesting. And I think the NEP is recommended till grade 8 if possible, but for till grade 5 for sure. So that's a second interesting point for me. I think the third point which I see is the tracking of school progress has to be an ongoing process and exercise. So far in India, traditionally, I think when I was growing up, we used to have 8th standard board exams. I don't know, some of the parents and some of you may have also done 8th standard board, state board exams, right? But I think over a period of time, those were exams. The purpose of exam is to do assessment of learning. While I think what NEP is talking about is that why should we have high stake exams at the end of child's academic journey? Why not introduce assessments for learning in between? So in the at the end of grade 3, at the end of grade 5, at the end of grade 8, they have introduced that there will be examinations which will test core concepts, relevantly higher order thinking skills, and application to real life situations. And I think that should actually, that's the hope, it should do away with rote memorization, what we talked about. This will also make it easier for parents to identify if there are any interventions required in a child's educational journey. Because what used to happen is if a child has a learning gap at grade 3, that carries on with the child and continues to widen by the child reaches grade 10. But right now with these interventions, when you identify there is a learning gap, you can do a course correction at that age only, or in a period of time followed that. At the end of grade 3, if you see a course correction required, say the linguistic skills are not developed, so you can have an intervention at that point of time and spend next 1 year in upskilling the child's linguistic skill. At the end of grade 5, if you think the numerical skills are not there, you can make that intervention so that when children move into higher classes, their foundation is strong. So these are a couple of 4 points, I would say. Interesting framework, pedagogical framework, which will be rely heavily on the traditional knowledge of India, the bilingual approach in teaching, even maths and science, up to grade 5, if possible, up to grade 8. It's not mandatory like school like ours, which are public schools. Public in terms of private international schools can continue teaching in English. The third is tracking progress of children across their different grades, 3, 5, 8, and 10, and 12, of course. And of course, the final key point which I'm watching out is the entry and exit points. The higher education used to be one straight highway, right? If you go to VAR, the only way to sort of upscale or reskill yourself is to come back, take a U-turn. Here, what they've done is at the end of 1 year of your graduation, you can take an diploma and exit, study, work for a period of time, and then come back. You can have a digital credits. You can store your credits and start something else if you don't like that. At the end of 2 years, you get an advanced diploma. At the end of 3 years, you get a degree, undergraduate degree. At the end of 4 years, you get a degree along with research focus. So I think that's a very exciting point for me. The children can exit during their undergraduate degree, and it's not a taboo. You can go, you can work, you can come back, and you can start. And your number of years you invest, 1 year, 2 years, don't go waste. So that's something exciting for me.
Absolutely. I think some of the points mentioned by you have, I actually agree with them, and especially this point of exit, because we see a lot of students, who take up an admission into a university or a program, and after 1 year, they feel that they want to change the course of the program. They do not want to continue. In the current education system, that 1 year is a waste for them. But with ABC being implemented, they will actually be able to take a transition from one university to the other, one program to the other, without losing that 1 year for them. So which definitely makes a lot of value. And the assessment at grade 3, grade 5, grade 8 is again is an incrementally great idea, because like you said that we will be able to assess the lack of cognitive literacy, any kind of skills, and course correction can take place at that very point of time. The students don't have to wait to reach grade 10 and then realize if there was something missing in their journey. My next question to you, sir, is the most important skills to succeed in the 21st century are creative thinking, collaboration, and communication. Do you think that the national education policy has been able to take these into account, and what measures can students take to enrich themselves with these skills?
Thank you. And I think, If you Google today, liberal arts program, it's going to show incrementally very high results than it was about 5 years, 7 years back. I think one of the fundamental changes has been recognizing the importance of multidisciplinary approach to learning and reducing silos of discipline. That if you're studying economics, you can only study economics. If you want to study physics, you only study physics. And introducing internships from as early as 12 years old. I mean, grade 6 onwards, they mentioned that students can have work experience, will enable to bridge a gap between school learning and connections with the outside world. What happens ironically is that when our children graduate into higher education from grade 12th into colleges feel schools have not prepared them for higher education. And then when they finish their college, they go into industry. The industry feels the colleges or academia haven't prepared them for the real life challenges. I remember when I was doing BCom from Delhi University, and I asked my professor and I said, what is the application of this accounting technique which you're teaching me? He said, well, when you leave college, you leave everything you learned here inside because the real world is very different outside. So how are we going to bridge those gaps? I think this is a progressive move. I also think one of the key initiatives the students can take is to engage in real world internships, job sharing program. Multilingualism is another way to enhance these skills and focus on experiential education. There has been mention of reducing curriculum also in NEP, curriculum content to improve focus on key concepts, ideas, applications, and problem solving. I'm watching out for that because I think ironically, whatever if you go back historically, whenever the morality declined in our society, we introduced a subject called moral science. Whenever the environmental degraded, we introduced a subject called environmental science. Now, I fear we shouldn't introduce subjects like problem solving and critical thinking subjects. These are part of everything that you do. Whether you're doing physical education or you're doing music or you're doing mathematics or you're doing literature, critical thinking has to be part of everything. It's the way you teach. So I think it's for children, I don't think there's anything much to do differently what they do today. Project-based learning, experiential learning, focusing on internships, developing skills like reading. We're reading, I hate to say it for a lack of a better word, but our children are reading, something which, and even we are consuming so much of content through WhatsApp forwards, messages, media bites, which is not adding into our learning, right? So how do you encourage simple habits like reading in children? I always encourage children to take up reading big time. Play a sport compulsory because, and not at a competitive level. You don't want to be, not everybody can be in Olympics. Not everybody can be in Indian cricket team, but you can still play cricket and learn core skills around cricket. You can develop a skill like performing arts or creative arts. So children, please get up and engage in real world challenges. If your uncle has a shop, your dad has a business, go and intern with them over vacations. You can ask for some money, pocket money, but just go and find a real world problem and try to solve it. And these days children amaze me with the kind of things they do. Look at Greta Thunberg, what she's done. She's shaken the world parliaments around the world, right? So children have a lot of power and agency today. So for them, I would simply say, go find a real world problem appearing in neighborhood, try to solve it with all that you've learned in school, whether that's mathematics, language, social science. You can find the application of all the content you've been delivered in school to find a real world problem and solve it.
Superb. I think that's incredibly great suggestion because I think students, the most important learning comes from hands-on learning and not sitting only in the classrooms. So that's definitely a very valuable suggestion. Kanika, would you like to take the next question?
Yeah. So, sir, if you could more guide us and give some tips to the children, like how we can inculcate reading habits to them, will be a really good thing to do apart from the new education policy we're talking, just that you spoke. There's so many kids like the school is trying to emphasize. But is there a way out where we can, just take their gadgets back and just give them the book in their hand, which I'm looking at?
Thank you, Kanika, for this question. And it'll be surprising for you all to know that I was not a fiction reader. I started reading at the age of 30 when a senior of mine, Mrs. Usha Albuquerque, she's a career counselor, a national level career counselor, she gifted me 2 books and she said to me, your vocabulary is very limited. You speak quite well, but your vocabulary is extremely limited. And I think you need this book. As a career counselor, she could do that to me. And I started reading late. So I think reading is not something you need to necessarily enjoy. Reading is something you need to do. You know, just like you breathe, you drink, you eat, you need to do reading.
Yeah.
Now, what do you want to read is your choice. And I necessarily, Kanika, I get your point. Reading books is important. I still have been gifted by my wife. I gifted my wife a Kindle about 2 years back on her birthday, and she gifted me a Kindle last year. I got a Kindle as a gift. I've not even charged it. I still continue to buy books. You know, I've not even, I opened the package, I got excited, I never charged it, I never read a book on it. But I think today's kids, I think they can decide what they want to read. They can read blogs. I don't have a problem with that. They can read ebooks. I don't have a problem with that. It's just that I think they just need to maintain the number of hours they spend on screen. But I think they can pick up a simple book and read it. And it doesn't, and I don't see there is something called age appropriate books, unless there is some sort of adult stuff which we don't want children to have an exposure to. I mean, I still pick up The Little Prince. I like reading that. I still pick up Archie's comic. I still read that. So please read anything. Doesn't matter what you read, as long as it is relevant, as long as it is adding to your knowledge. And I think another thing, Kanika, ironically, we expect from children too much. We don't ask ourselves, when was the last book I read? My parents didn't read, right? So why are we expecting poor children? So we need to model that. Yeah. Create time in your family saying Sunday 12 to 1 will only be dear time. Drop everything and read. We will all read whatever we want to read, irrespective. So I think once you start learning, enjoying reading over a period of time, reading has to start as a compulsory thing. It doesn't start as a hobby, let me tell you. Over a period of time, you grow in it. And this year I've read not many. My wife is a voracious reader. She ends up reading about 20, 30, maybe 40 books a year. I've just read about 14 books. I'm still proud that I've read 14 books this year. So I don't sometimes like the book I pick up, but I make sure that I finish it and learn from it what I want to learn. So I think, and I read blogs. I listen to audiobooks now. It's fine. If you want to do audiobooks, that's also fine. But try to keep a combination of both. Do some reading, some audiobooks, some podcasts, some blogs. Do a variety of reading. And please, adults, don't tell children unless you've read a book. Please pick up a book and read it.
So the first thing now everybody is going to do is now start.
I completely agree with what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. And Kanika, I've also been asked this question on various platforms. And my answer is that, children do half of what you tell them, but most of what you will do yourself.
Yeah, true.
So it's very important that if we want children to read, we have to also read. I mean, something that I do personally at my home, we have a weekly digital detox, 2 hours. Nobody has to go anywhere near the screens. And we just sit with and discuss what we've read in the last 1
That's amazing.
week as a family. So all of us just get our own books, whatever stage, chapter we are, we just discuss as a family what we've been reading, what are our insights. It just inculcates a environment of reading and pushes the child to read.
Yeah.
If they'll just see us on screens, they will also be on screens.
Let me ask you one thing. Don't you have all kitty parties? Don't you have family get-togethers? Do you have a reading club in family? Which family has a reading club? Tell me. Where you're doing book exchange. Why don't we do that? Start with families. Start with adults. We see most of the bookshops have been shut down during pandemic, and it pains to see that. So I think that's what we need to model for children, our children.
Agreed.
It should be fine.
Coming back to the new education policy, sir. There are so many new subjects which have been introduced now, such as coding and computational thinking at middle level school. So digital literacy is definitely very important. But what is, in your opinion, the edtech industry? Like, there are so many edtechs now, apps, there are so many companies which are doing it, so many private companies which are operating. How do you look at this?
I may sound a little pessimist here, so forgive me if you don't agree to me. We can all agree to disagree. I think it's a fad or I would say it's a fallacy. We as a nation have not even achieved foundational literacy and numeracy. We are far behind that. At the age 3, child doesn't have basic reading and writing skills. And I'm not talking about school like ours. Yeah. I think what we need to do is, the problem cannot be generalized again. There are many types of schools, many different types of schools. When it comes to government schools, the government shouldn't distract from its core. That is, each child should be able to achieve foundational literacy and numeracy skills. The focus has to be on foundational literacy and numeracy. That's it. Forget about computational thinking, forget about coding. That'll happen automatically over a period of time. I think there was an interesting project by an economist called Hole in the Wall. If you Google it, the gentleman, I'm Subrata, I'm forgetting the economist's name, sorry, forgive me, my bad. That gentleman went into a community, which is what we normatively call slum. I don't like to call it slum, it's a derogatory word, but I think community, and he put up computers on the wall, and the children went and learned it by themselves. Nobody taught them. The children have never been to school. Read up about that project, Hole in the Wall. So I think that is what is important. Please keep your basics straight and right. Sometimes, ironically, when I go to schools, visit schools around the country and talk to different principals, I end up asking one question: when do you teach? You do everything else, but when do you teach? Right? So I think schools also have to remember that the core of the school is going to be a teaching and learning and relationships. Yeah. And computational thinking or coding, it cannot be isolated from the core curriculum. Like, for example, I'll just give you our example. At Shiv Nadar schools, we don't teach something called IT or, computer science or something like that till grade 10th. From grade 1 to grade 10th, there is a graded curriculum. Every child goes through that curriculum. In grade 10th, they have to pick up a real world problem, use all the skills they have learned in their computer, whether that's design or that's Excel or that's AutoCAD or that's 3D modeling or anything around the curriculum. They have to pick up a problem, real world problem, and solve it. Okay. Right? Because all that computational thinking, all that coding on a certificate will look very nice, but what will you do with that? Right? Are we teaching children to do something with that? We just finished the semi-finals for that. I had kids who've talked about very, very simple ideas. One of my favorite idea was book list. That means everybody got onto an app, exchange the books you want to exchange with each other. The other one was Swasth. Swasth was that anybody who has extra medicines at home, which they're not using, because a lot of time doctors prescribe medicine. So they became aggregator of extra medicines lying at home and channelizing into the nonprofit organizations and hospitals which need it. The other app talked about translating. They realized how they find out the problem. They went to the lunch area and they were thinking about what problem they want to solve. In a lunch area, there is a young man who's deaf and dumb. So he's, I'm sorry for using these crude words, but I think he's hearing and speaking impaired. Now, when they tried communicating with him, they said it's so hard to communicate with him. And they said what they want to do is they want to use technology, wherein if I have that app, I show it to that gentleman when he does the sign language. Even if I don't understand the sign language will be translated by app into the voice notes. So that's what we're talking about. Pick up a real world problem and tell them how to solve it. We've been talking about VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's also been sort of re-christianed now, if I may say so. It has got a new avatar. It's called vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. So there are two sides. We can live in this VUCA world where we continue to talk about how uncertain the world is, how volatile the world is. There is so much of ambiguity all around, or we can set up a vision for next 10 years, or we can set up the clarity. And again, I continue to go back to ask these questions. I have nothing against XYZ companies doing this, but I think it's their business. Everybody wants to be in business. Why are you doing what you're doing? If you want your child to learn computational thinking or coding, why do you want your child to learn that? The first question is that. Okay. The theory of golden circle, Simon Sinek's theory of golden circle. Why? My fear is with this idea of promotion of computing and computational thinking and coding, we will have another industry like IIT coaching factory model. And I think whenever you want child to learn a skill, ask yourself, ask the child, ask the school, why are you teaching this? What will my child gain out of it? Not a certificate at the end of it, not a report card number. Can he solve a real world problem with this coding? We have engineers who can't even change a fuse if it goes fuse in the house. What are we talking about? So that's what my little take. I'm great on IT. IT is a way forward. Technology is the way where the world will move. But is it practical to teach coding to a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old without even giving them a basic right of education, which is literacy and numeracy? So I think that's the question.
I agree. I think we should actually take the children to real world problems, show them, and even if we can talk out to them, that will open up their minds more than, just teaching them.
And trust me, this there was this one this thing program, which is Booklist app, which was my favorite app, one of my favorite apps. The girls didn't know coding at all. They learned it in 3 weeks.
Imagine.
On their own. School didn't teach them.
Imagine.
They said we needed to learn this code to design this website because the interface we wanted to use.
I would request everybody to mute themselves, please.
I think Anuradha, if you can mute yourself. So I think that's important. If the children, something called self-directed learning. If children find a real world problem which they feel engaged in, they will find a way to learn it.
Yeah. So you were actually telling us about, would request others to please mute yourselves. So what you just now mentioned when you were talking about this new education policy, you told us about the internships, the high school internships, which are which is now we have to implement in our systems also. So how do you think a school at a city level can be prepared for imbibing these high school internships?
I think I ended up muting myself.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So I'm a good instruction follower. So you can see I'm a good student. Interesting enough, in Shivnada school, and the last school I was working was Legacy School, Bangalore. We optimized the power of our parent community. What we did was we did a survey with parents. What field are you in? Can you offer job shadowing? Or because job shadowing, I used to do it for 9th and 10th. You go, and if you want to become a doctor, go to a medical practitioner and just shadow him for a week. Nobody will give you internship. What you can do is you can measure weight, height, maybe blood pressure and things like that. But you can't do more than that. You can't prescribe medicines. And likewise, if you go to KPMG or Ernst & Young or any big four, they will not suddenly give you files to read and analyze because that's not your skill. The idea is to see what your life would be if you choose to become XYZ. And in 11th and 12th, we used to collect data from parents. School would do a survey. Would you like to offer internships to our children? What kind of domains can you offer internships in? So we would list it out for them. And then we would have data from parents, what kind of internships are available within our community. Then we would go back to children and parents saying, hey, the summers are coming. Would you like to take an internship? And what kind of field do you want to take an internship? And we would match that. Is it me? One of the most exciting part of it is when you become very boring, people just turn off there and go away. I hope I'm not too boring. So I think so optimize the power of your community. Within your parents' community, do a survey. What kind of professions they are in? Can they help school with the internship opportunities? Then ask students what kind of opportunities they are looking at and map these to each other. In addition, there are a lot of organizations because there is a demand and supply, simple phenomena of economics. There is a demand for internships. There are a lot of organizations who are offering internships today to young children. There are online internships. So in online, we've seen another world. Yeah. Sucrose is one organization which I've worked with, and their Sucrose has got very good internships. But you can also talk to your relative friends and ask them. But as a school, I would say collect your parent professional data. Ask them if they are willing to offer internships to children. How many children can they offer internships to? 2, 3, 4, 5. And ask children what kind of internships they want. And it's just like a matchmaking thing. You need this.
If the school can do this, it's a fabulous idea.
And we do it. We've been doing it for 3 years, 4 years now. And Kanika, it runs very, very well. It runs very well.
It's very interesting. Actually, it can really help kids out of it.
I think the idea of internship is not a Western phenomena. I just wanted to add here, if you look at the traditional Gurukul system, internship was integrated into the curriculum. Well, we are a large country, so we have a problem of plenty. At an institution level, which is private like ours, we've been doing this successfully for years. And I think I've given you my mantra: optimize on the power of your parent community. You can do wonders here.
I think this is a brilliant initiative, and I've heard a couple of schools now do this. And like you're saying, the power of community is the strongest power, and you also harp on you today, especially for kids in Kanpur and parents in Kanpur. We think that, oh, our children do not have the access to corporates, but we do have access to large business houses within the city and all kinds of careers and professions. At the end of the day, we see chartered accountants, architects, teacher, counselor, doctor, painter, lawyer everywhere in the city, and that's what we want. That's the kind of visibility that we want to offer to our students, and tell them that eventually, if you want to become this person, this is the kind of life you want to live. So that's very important.
And Kirti, let me tell you just a snippet here. People
I think that's a
feel
very
that,
valuable suggestion made there.
yeah, Kirti, just a small suggestion here. It's always the grass is greener on the other side. People always believe it's easy to get internships in the large cities because there are many opportunities. Let me tell you, it is not so. I think the power of smaller cities is far more stronger than a power of a big city, because everybody knows everybody.
Correct.
So you
I
can
agree.
do 5 calls and just find an internship for your child. And it doesn't happen in big cities. It just doesn't happen in big cities.
Absolutely. I totally agree with what you're saying, sir. Here, just by the power of network, things are more approachable and doable vis-a-vis a large city. I totally agree with that.
And should
And
any school reach out to
really
you
great
for,
suggestion.
yeah, should any school reach out to you for help, I'm happy to meet one-on-one and explain them how they can do it.
Wow,
Happy to.
thank you so much. My next question to you, sir, is that interdisciplinary choice of subjects. Now, this has been a very important point of discussion, because we saw the growth of liberal education in India, and now national education policy talks about it. So now this choice of subjects is being offered at the school level, but different schools will adopt it differently. Some schools, especially in tier 1 cities, may adopt to this cross-disciplinary learning much faster than the others in the tier 2 or tier 3. So what kind of advantages or disadvantages do you see for students from the system?
Ironically, I don't know if many people know or not, the interdisciplinarity was never missing in our education system. Right from the ancient times, but we start creating silos for ourselves. CBSE doesn't tell you you can only take sciences. If you take sciences, you can't take humanities. For schools, it's easy to create administrative blocks and say, if you're taking physics, chemistry, and maths, you are in sciences. So that is already existing. There's nothing need to change. The schools have to be more open-minded, probably invest in a little more in human resource where the children can take subjects from different blocks. But here the role of career counselor also comes. I don't want to end up picking up subjects which doesn't have a vertical alignment with career, right? Because it's a step forward to higher education. So that's very, very important. Very silly thing I'll tell you. For example, we offer a subject called entrepreneurship, but Delhi University does not accept that as a subject. CBSE offers it, but Delhi University says it's a vocational subject. So the higher education and the boards also need to talk here. And equity and access, as I already mentioned earlier, is a huge challenge in a country as diverse as us. Forget about anything else. Will we have trained human resource to implement in a true spirit? We don't have trained teachers to do that. 70% of our children, as I mentioned, grade 3, don't even know how to read and do basic maths. So schools which are in urban areas serving advantaged communities are already doing this. I had a student who picked up physics, arts, computer science, and and music. And with this combination, she's gone to do filmmaking because she wanted to understand the science behind it as well as the art behind it. So there are many such options, and we're already doing it in urban schools. I don't think it's just an administrative inconvenience to schools. When they say a student can take physics, maths, and economics, they say, how do I create a block now? Economics is a humanities subject, and this is a science subject. So I think the deeper the pocket, the more inclination of schools is towards encouraging interdisciplinarity of subjects, they will have to make investment in human resource for at least 3 to 5 years. Post that, people will start following the trend. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. And I think I strongly vouch for interdisciplinary learning because unlike the silos that we had created, where a student could only study science or humanities or commerce, I think that just creates kind of roadblocks in the thought process. And we're able to open up our mind when we're studying subjects from different disciplines and understanding the complexities and understanding how different subjects relate to each other. At the end of the day, this whole world is made up of all understanding of each and everything. So it's very important to connect the dots which different subjects are bringing in together. My next question to you is, you talked in the beginning about measurable outcomes, learning outcomes at grade third, grade fifth, grade eighth level. And we've already harped on the fact that it's a great advantage, that the school system will be able to provide so that the learning outcomes can be measured. Do you see that now with formative assessments being incorporated, we have the policy talks about peer assessment, the policy talks about parental assessment, holistic progress report. Uh, India is a diverse nation, and we've already seen how when CBSE launched the grading mechanism, the qualitative assessment framework could not reap the benefits. So are we truly kind of prepared for this kind of holistic assessment where there are many stakeholders doing the assessment for the child?
So see, I've been associated with the international curriculum over a period of time, and I feel just like Checkpoint exam in Cambridge has been designed, the purpose of this assessment is to measure learning outcomes. Plan your next course of teaching. After identifying learning gaps, you do assessment, you identify learning gaps, and then you plan your assessment. And my understanding is, I think there is an organization called and there are organizations who are already doing that. There is CEM, CEM, there is ESSET, there is Acer IBT. These are the organizations which already help you identify or measure skills and not the knowledge domain, knowledge and understanding, primarily skills. So I think fear in that these assessments for measuring learning outcomes will end up becoming board exams because our teachers are not trained to design formative assessments. That's altogether a different field. And, mostly these assessments end up becoming for measuring learning and not of learning. Then it's fine. If you're measuring it for learning, that I've done the teaching, I want to measure whether the learning has happened or not and go back. If it hasn't happened, I'll go back and reteach my concept and correct it. But if I'm doing assessment of learning, then I'm grading a child. And in the past, we've seen what happened. You mentioned very politely, I'll name it out, I'll call it out loud, CCE, continuous and comprehensive evaluation, which aimed at measuring child's learning through the year through variety of formative assessments, right? But after 8 years, 2009, it was introduced. I was the batch when Dr. Ganguly was heading CBSE. We've had multiple meetings. He came back and gave feedback to what we were working on, but it was withdrawn in 2017. So my fear is the moment we consider or label it to be an assessment of learning, we will push students too soon to prepare for only testing. Then in grade 3, there will be a coaching center or an app or a website which will train you for 3 exams, grade 5, grade 8. So we need to fear that. I'm saying the intent is great. Let's watch out how is it implemented, and it needs radical trainings for teachers at the grassroots level, which is not happening.
That's exactly my concern too. That a lot of times we're not prepared for understanding the. So you're on mute.
No, thank you.
So that's exactly my concern too, that a lot of times, we are not prepared for understanding the outcome of that assessment. We are just looking at it in an empirical way and saying that, oh, my child scored this much. And that might just push children and parents to get into just this rat race of scoring higher right from grade 3 or grade 5, because we may not be able to educate educators, parents, and the society at large to understand the value that this kind of assessment can bring in and how to assess the child on these frameworks. So there is immense amount of work that needs to be done at the ground level to educate first the educators, who will be the first point of contact for the parents and everybody else.
That's right. So I think we've traditionally looked at assessments as a output model. I got 90%, I got 80%, I got 100%. Whether I'm successful or not, whether I've learned or not, doesn't matter. So I think that's the, as you mentioned, the empirical approach or the numerical approach to assessments has to change. And again, I'm saying you don't really have to reinvent the wheel. There are already organizations doing these assessments. Like in our system also, we do something called asset testing, which will tell us that what topics, in what grades are weak. And that informs us that in the next class, when we start with those topics. So I think that is important to identify. We have to do assessment for learning and not of learning.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. My next question is towards the higher education spectrum. We've discussed a couple of things on the school education system. So the National Education Policy talks about the multidisciplinary education and research universities known as MERUs, which will be established at par with IITs and IIMs across the country. And these will be liberal arts or multidisciplinary academic institutions. We've already seen universities of the likes of Ashoka, Flame, Kriya, which are offering liberal education. There is a lot of, some parents have accepted liberal education, some parents still do not understand this. So what is your opinion on the liberal education, establishment of MERUs and other things?
I think, thank you for mentioning that. Universities like Shiv Nada University, Ashoka, Kriya, Flame, Thapar, BM Munjal, Christ, Bennett, and I think the list is continuing to grow. And that's very, very heartwarming for me. That's also saying that there is an acceptance. However, as I mentioned, we have an advantage as well as a problem of plenty. There are still serving a very small percentage of population with many even offering need-blind scholarship. That means if you have inclination, if you have skills, I will teach you, money doesn't matter, but needs to scale up. And again, now the statement about getting acceptance from the parent community is concerned, it requires a sustained dialogue between academia and industry, where the success stories of the students from these colleges need to be told. And let me tell you, there are many success stories. You see the stories of alumni of few of the top institutions in India holding global positions are duly highlighted. Whether that's Satya Nadella or anybody else, we pick up one person, we put him on a pedestal, whether we have contribution or not. Why? Because I feel it's instilling the fear in the minds of people. If you're not at a top institution, you're wasted. If you're not in IIT Kanpur, you're wasted, right? The fear has led to the dawn of education capitalism, I call it, where we see huge investments being made in the coaching industry because everybody wants to inspire to be that one person who has been glorified. So I would say, before anything, the mindset needs to change. The media and schools have a big role to play, and it's not going to happen in a day or two. The industry has to come and talk about the kind of, there's something called T-shaped careers and T-shaped individuals and I-shaped individuals. The I-shaped individuals used to be a traditional scene where you have the depth of one subject domain. For example, if I'm a physicist, I know only about physics. If I'm a biologist, I know only about biology in depth. But the industry is not looking at I-shaped individuals. They're looking at T-shaped individuals. They have expertise in one domain, but they also have, just like T ke upar ka top ka T hai, that the other I, they also have diverse understanding of different disciplines. If the industry is moving towards that, there will be more jobs in that domain. I was in a Kriya Career Dialogues on this Saturday, and I had about 5 panelists who've come from diverse backgrounds, but all of them were working in sustainability. Somebody was an architecture, somebody was microbiologist, somebody was an engineer, and somebody was an economics graduate from LSR, but all of them are working in sustainability. So I think the industry is changing. The stories need to come out through media and school, and that needs to change. And we need to stop highlighting one success story. We only paste the photographs of the IITians who go to IIT. I'm sorry, I have nothing against IIT. IIT Bombay started a liberal arts program. I'm saying, why just IIT? There are so many beautiful institutions, wonderful institutions who are doing, and these stories need to come out. And schools can do that, media can do that, you and I can do that by these conversations. And that is what is important. And it's changing, at least in urban areas, it's changing big time. People understand what liberal arts is and how does it do. And ironically, Kirti, liberal arts is what Indian traditional education system was. There were 65 disciplines, and you can choose any number of disciplines across these disciplines, right? So I think it's just going back, on a lighter note, Ghar Vapsi, that the old traditional education system is what we're looking at.
Absolutely. And we had such a robust and a beautiful education system, and our universities like Nalanda and the others were at the top or the peak of education system. And you rightly said, it's just like going back to the roots uh, with adoption of liberal education. And I also agree with you that we need to share more success stories. Just highlighting one individual, one poster story does not mean that everybody who follows the same path will be successful, and everybody else who does not will not be successful.
And interesting enough, I was reading a friend of mine, Anjali, shared a report from, I think, Royal Bank of Canada, and there were top 100 influential people in the world, and probably only 1 or 2% were from the Ivy Leagues and the top institutions. Rest were all from liberal arts colleges, because they are the people. I mean, you look at Jeff, you look at Elon Musk, you look at anybody's success stories, which Ivy colleges have they gone to? But I don't want to highlight dropping out of school as well. That's another ballgame. But I think what is important to understand is that we are heading towards T-shaped economy, T-shaped careers. It's better that we get subject expertise across domains.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, for that matter, most of the top ranked universities in US are all liberal education universities, which will give you the space to select your subjects much later than what we in India expect the students to do.
On a lighter note, yoga is very big in US and Western countries. We give our ancient wisdom to them and they capitalize on it. So,
I had a student, sir, who was a great dancer. And she chose engineering. And today, she's made a career where she's analyzing dancing movements to make certain angles to develop prosthetics for patients. So these are kind of combinations, students today have, they can just combine knowledge from various different domains and subjects and come out with something beautiful. My last question to you before I open the house for the audience is, we are seeing the introduction of the common entrance examinations for admission to higher education institutions, which will be offered by the National Testing Agency. And Delhi University has very recently announced the same. So Delhi University, being a pioneer institution in India and a preferred choice for a lot of parents, what impact do you see, and how do you see this move? Personally, I am a big fan of this move, and I personally think that marks should no longer be a criteria for admissions alone. Would want to have your.
So I go back to my statement. We are a country of plenty and a problem of plenty. So we have to have sieving mechanism. You cannot have 2 lakh people coming up in an interview in Delhi University for 10,000, 15,000 seats, right? So my question, first of all, is what will these entrance tests measure? My worry is, though, that this will lead to the dawn of new coaching industry. So we need to work out what do we want to measure and how do we measure. That's very important. And it indeed is a very welcoming move. And we've seen in the US standardized testing like SAT and ACT have been in existence for over 9.5 decades, and they've been running it successfully. Now, there is a movement starting in US, which is test optional or test blind. So they're going back to different processes. Of course,
they are moving back from SAT and ACT now.
That's right. So coming back to the same dilemma, what will this test measure? How will we ensure the issues of equity and access? Will this lead to mushrooming of another industry? How will we ensure we measure what we value or value what we measure? Because that's always a worry, do we measure what we value or do we value what we measure? We don't. So how do we create a level playground for all? How do you think a child in communication or verbal assessment from, say, Kanpur is still a great city, maybe Jhajjar will compete with the child in Gurgaon who has access to every other resource, right? So having mentioned my skepticism, I would say it will take huge pressure off the student's mind from advantage, urban, semi-urban backgrounds of appearing in multiple exams on multiple dates. Less stress, more competitive, organized, and remove many biases one may have against board one graduates from in terms of being liberal with marking. Sometimes we say, oh, this board does very liberal marking, children get more marks. But is that what we're seeking? My question is the entrance test, one entrance test, an end to all the challenges we've been facing? What is holistic education? What are we trying to measure? Do we value what we measure? I'm still grappling my head around this announcement. After one cycle of admissions, I'll be able to reiterate what it turns out to be. But right now I have my skepticism here, because it's not an equal playground for everybody. It's not. A child in a semi-urban area or rural area or tier 2 cities will always probably at a disadvantage from a tier 1 city. So how do you play a level ground for everybody?
I absolutely agree with you that the challenges and that are different for different level of cities. I mean, I've had schools here in Kanpur, which we do not even call a tier 3 city. We fall in the tier 2, where some schools have refused a child uh, to take humanities just because the child was 96, 97%. And they said that you should be studying science alone. Why should we will not offer you humanities. So, and this is coming from the education sector. So definitely the kind of understanding the level playing field is not different. When I go to forums in Gurgaon, Bombay, and I see educators and how different schools are at a different thought process altogether, it creates a huge disparity in terms of understanding, because educators, principals, teachers, they are the first point of contact for the student and for the parents. And if we are not imparting or educating them in the right sense, the trickle down effect will happen at a much slower rate for a tier 2 and tier 3 city, and then the rural class. So that brings me to an end of my questions, and I would like to quickly open the house for the audience. You can type in your questions. I have few questions in the chat box, which I will take up in the beginning. And then anybody who wants to ask a question, please feel free to put it on the chat box. We have few last minutes to take your questions. There is a question saying that, can you suggest how should school management and faculties bring about a proper transition and implementation of national education policy?
So I think this question has many layers of understanding. I think structural change is not too much to worry about. I think what you need to do is you need to reorganize your school ecosystem in terms of 5 years plus 3 years plus 3 years plus 4 years. That's the easiest thing to do. Now, not having context, I don't know if I can tell you this right now, but the next thing you need to invest on is on teacher training.
Yes.
If your teachers don't understand, I don't know how many schools have actually created study groups to even discuss NEP on a regular basis. So I think create a task force, which is dedicatedly meeting every week to identify, where you are in your learning journey as an institution. What does NEP expect you to be in probably 3 to 5 years time, and probably start making recommendations for making those changes. And I am always fan of start something at a micro level and go macro, because by the time NEP will get implemented, probably there'll be another document. So identify what rationally is possible for you to change, but create a task force of different people comprising different subject groups, not necessarily only maths and science, but languages and arts. I cannot stress more on please bring in arts. Have a parent being part of it so that the parents also understand your pain, because a lot of time parents don't understand school principals' pain. Bring in a college level person or a high education professional. You have IIT Kanpur, ask a professor to volunteer sometime and meet weekly and set up your short-term, medium-term and long-term goals. Say, for example, in 1 year, what alignments do you want to bring in NEP as far as your school structure is concerned? Very simple. Do 5 years plus 3 years plus 3 years plus 4 years. That's simplest to do. Can I start making instructional changes in terms of, I mean, there could be major decisions. Do you want to teach in vernacular language? Do you want to be a Hindi medium school because you're in a Hindi Bhashi state? Maybe not. So how would you still make sure that the language, the vernacular language gets still due respect in teaching and learning process, while you may not choose it as to be a preferred language of instruction? That's another aspect. How are you building in integration of arts into across all subjects? How is art integration happening? Is art becoming a part and parcel of everything? So I think these are some suggestions. And have an audit committee which does the audit after a year and then set up the goals. But create a task force across different genders, of different experiences, of different tenure in school, Don't get all elderly people and get them to implement NEP. That'll be a disaster, let me tell you. We feel the most experienced teachers are the most, I'm not discounting the experience here. I have great respect for all experienced teachers, but you need fresh perspective and fresh mind. Okay. I don't know if that answers your questions, but probably it has many layers. I'm happy to meet you in person and sort of take you through, but set up a task force, engage participation from community. Community means a parent, a higher education institution. You're very lucky you are in a city which has IIT, get a professor from IIT, create a task force, set up short-term goals, set up medium-term goals, and start aligning. Do not lose focus on the traditional wisdom. Make sure that Hindi, if it's not a medium of instruction, at least it gets due respect of having a traditional wisdom, and my assumption is that I've been to Kanpur, I've worked with a couple of good schools in Kanpur. So I know that though a lot of children and parents are second, third generation learners and they speak English very well, but how do you bring back and revive back love for Hindi? Art and music and performing and creative arts to be integrated across all domains. And bring in more success stories from liberal arts. Please do a career fair every year. I'm happy to help you to build one. Bring people who are doing successfully well after doing liberal arts degrees, other than IITs. That's it, Kirti.
Super. Thank you so much. That was a great session. And now I'd like to invite our chairperson, Ms. Kanika Ved, to offer the green certificate to our guest speaker.
It was wonderful event. I'm like so happy that we could actually do this, because like hearing to you, sir, has given me a lot of insight into now how to handle things. And I'm sure educators are also going to take a lot from this. So this is like, so we have planted a tree in your name in the Sundarban, and you can track your tree with the certificate number given on the right hand side. It's our way of keeping cleaner and greener environment. And thank you, Sami, so much once again for joining us, and Kriti for helping me just, to do this session around. It was wonderful, and hearing the comments from everybody, I'm sure everybody's enjoyed the session, sir. Thank you so much, and we'll be happy to get in touch with you anywhere we get stuck up now next.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kirti.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this session today.
Thank you.